Picture standing on an ancient battlefield, the air thick with dust and the metallic scent of blood. Around you, warriors move with eerie calm, their faces unshaken even as death looms on every side. How could anyone face such terror without flinching? What kind of training could forge minds so steady, so unbreakable, that even the specter of death couldn't shake their resolve? The answer lies not in brute strength or secret weapons, but in something far more profound, a philosophy that taught them to see the world, and even their own mortality, with unflinching clarity. Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor, once wrote, "Death smiles at us all a man can do is smile back." That simple, staggering idea was the cornerstone of a warrior's mindset, one that transformed fear into focus, dread into discipline. Stoicism wasn't just a set of ideas for these ancient fighters, it was a survival tool, a mental armor they wore into every battle. While today we might panic at the thought of our own impermanence, they trained relentlessly to embrace it. They didn't just accept death, they practiced staring it down again and again until the fear lost its grip. This video isn't just about history, it's about uncovering the timeless techniques these warriors used to master their minds. Techniques that, even now, can teach us how to face our own battles, whether on a literal battlefield or in the quiet struggles of daily life with the same unshakable calm. What if you could walk through life with that kind of confidence, not because you're invincible, but because you've learned, as they did, to distinguish between what controls you and what you can control? The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control, and it was their secret weapon. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive deep into the exercises, the meditations, and the mental drills that turned ordinary soldiers into legends of resilience. You'll discover how they used visualization to rehearse loss before it happened, how they reframed adversity as training, and how they cultivated a mindset where fear had no power. This is more than ancient wisdom, it's a blueprint for mental toughness that still works today. So let's begin where they did, not by running from death, but by understanding it so thoroughly that it could never hold you hostage again. What if death wasn't an enemy but a teacher? That's exactly how the Stoics saw it, not as a terrifying end, but as a natural part of existence, as inevitable as the setting sun. Seneca, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, wrote letters urging his friends to confront mortality head-on. He compared life to a banquet where death is simply the host signaling it's time to leave the table. You wouldn't rage against the host, would you? You'd rise with gratitude for the meal. That's the mindset warriors cultivated, seeing death not as a thief stealing their future, but as a reminder to live fully in the present. On the battlefield, this philosophy wasn't just abstract, it was life-saving. While others froze in fear, Stoic-trained fighters moved with precision because they'd already rehearsed their own deaths in their minds. They practiced what's called negative visualization, picturing the worst-case scenarios not to dwell on them, but to strip away their power. Imagine standing in formation, spear in hand, and mentally accepting that this could be your last moment. Once you've faced that truth, what's left to distract you? No panic, no hesitation, just clarity. That's why Roman generals like Epictetus, who was once a slave, taught their troops to see death as indifferent, like rain or wind. It wasn't good or bad, it simply was, and in that neutrality they found freedom. Now, shift the lens to your own life. How much time do you waste worrying about things you can't control? Aging, illness, the unpredictable twists of fate. The Stoics would argue that fear of death isn't just about the end itself. It's about all the smaller losses we resist along the way. But what if you stopped seeing loss as failure and started seeing it as part of the rhythm of life? How much bolder would you live if you truly believed, as Marcus Aurelius did, that the longest life and the shortest life amount to the same thing? Time isn't the measure, depth is. Every moment you spend fearing the inevitable is a moment stolen from the joy of living. So here's the challenge. Next time anxiety about the future creeps in, ask yourself not how to avoid death, but how to make your life so vivid, so purposeful, that when the time comes, you'll have no regrets. That's the warrior's way. The Romans had a ritual so jarring to modern sensibilities it might seem macabre at first glance. Victorious generals parading through the streets would employ a slave to whisper in their ear, "Remember, you must die." Some even kept skulls in their homes not as trophies but as tutors. This was Memento Mori, Latin for "remember you must die," and far from being morbid, it was their most powerful tool for living well. Imagine a society where leaders didn't chase fleeting fame but measured every decision against the inevitability of their own end. That's the clarity death offered them, not as a threat, but as the ultimate accountability partner. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who shaped countless warriors' minds, put it bluntly: "Keep death and exile before your eyes every day, for then you will never have a base thought nor desire anything beyond measure." For these fighters, mortality wasn't a distant abstraction, it was a daily drill. They woke asking, "If this is my final sunrise, how will I earn it?" That urgency stripped away pettiness. No time for grudges when the sword could fall at any moment. No room for procrastination when tomorrow wasn't promised. Every action became a referendum on their character. Now contrast that with how we often operate today, distracted by trivialities, postponing meaning until some vague someday. But what if you borrowed the Stoics' lens? You don't need a skull on your desk. Modern Memento Mori can be as simple as a morning journal prompt. What would today contain if it were my last? Not to incite panic, but to ignite priority. The entrepreneur Tim Ferriss keeps a death meditation practice, writing down his hypothetical final words to uncover what truly matters. The result: brutal honesty. When death sits at the table, you stop pretending. You stop wasting hours on what won't echo beyond your lifetime. Here's the paradox the ancients uncovered: staring at death doesn't diminish life, it intensifies it. Like an hourglass held to your eye, the finite grains magnify each one's value. A warrior who's made peace with dying fights not recklessly, but precisely because every strike carries weight. A leader who remembers their mortality governs not for legacy, but for justice. Your version of this practice might be a note on your mirror or a recurring phone reminder. The form doesn't matter, the shift in perspective does. When you stop fearing the end, you start honoring the now. So let me ask you this, with the clock ticking, as it does for all of us, what have you been postponing that deserves your unflinching attention today? The warriors didn't just accept death, they loved it. That's the radical secret behind their unshakable resilience, a principle called amor fati, Latin for love of fate. To them, death wasn't a grim inevitability to endure. It was the final brushstroke in a life well lived, a destiny to embrace with something fiercer than resignation, with reverence. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who led Rome through war and plague, wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." For a soldier staring down a charging enemy, that meant seeing the battle not as a threat, but as the very reason for their training, their courage, their purpose. The obstacle was the path. Picture a Spartan phalanx advancing into combat, shields locked, each man's fate tied to the next. They didn't fight despite the risk of death, they fought because of it. Possibility of falling was what gave their stand meaning. This wasn't blind fatalism, it was a deliberate reframing of reality. When a warrior whispers amor fati as the arrows fly, they're not surrendering to chaos, they're asserting control over the one thing they truly own, their perception. A broken spear becomes a chance to fight smarter. A retreating ally becomes a test of loyalty. Even a mortal wound becomes a final act of defiance. Now, bring that mindset into the modern world. What if your biggest setback, a job loss, a betrayal, an illness wasn't a curse but fuel? The Stoics didn't just preach this idea, they lived it. Take Epictetus, born a slave, crippled by a cruel master, yet rising to become one of history's most influential teachers. His suffering wasn't an accident, it was his curriculum. He taught that the blows life deals us are like blocks of marble given to a sculptor. Chiseled with the right mindset, they become art. So here's the challenge. Next time you face a struggle, ask not why is this happening to me, but what can this make of me? The warrior's resilience wasn't forged in victory laps, it was honed in the grit of adversity. When you start loving your fate, even the hard parts, you stop resisting life's currents and start riding them. Fear loses its grip because every twist, even the last one, becomes part of the story you're proud to live. How different would your days look if you saw each challenge, even the smallest, as a gift in disguise? The Spartans had a brutal training ritual called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before battle, they wouldn't just visualize victory. They'd close their eyes and vividly imagine the worst possible outcomes, their shield shattering, their formation breaking, their comrades falling around them. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Why dwell on disaster? But the Stoics understood something profound about fear. It grows in the dark. By dragging their worst nightmares into the light and examining them coldly, these warriors stripped those scenarios of their terror. Seneca put it bluntly, what is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. Think of it like fireproofing your mind. When a Spartan pictured his own death in gruesome detail, he wasn't inviting despair, he was inoculating himself against panic. By mentally rehearsing defeat, he discovered something startling. Even in the worst-case scenario, there was still a choice: to die with honor, to take one more enemy with him. To make his last breath count, that realization didn't weaken him, it made him unbreakable. Because once you've stared at the abyss and realized you can still choose your stance, the abyss loses its power over you. Now fast forward to modern life. We spend so much energy avoiding uncomfortable thoughts. What if I lose my job? What if my health fails? What if I'm betrayed? But here's the paradox the Spartans uncovered. Avoidance doesn't erase fear, it amplifies it. Like a monster under the bed, it grows larger the less you look at it. Premeditatio Malorum flips the script. When you deliberately imagine your worst fear, really sit with it, dissect it, ask what would I do next, something shifts. The bogeyman becomes manageable, a financial collapse becomes a chance to simplify, a breakup becomes space for reinvention. Even grief, when faced squarely, reveals its hidden gifts, the clarity that love was worth the pain. Seneca practiced this daily. He'd write himself letters describing the loss of his status, his wealth, even his family, not because he wanted those things to happen, but because he wanted to prove to himself that he could endure them. He who has learned to die has unlearned slavery, he wrote. That's the real aim of this exercise, not to dwell on suffering, but to reclaim your sovereignty over it. So here's a challenge. Pick one fear that's been whispering in your ear. Maybe it's public failure, loneliness, or aging. Now take 10 minutes and write out the worst-case scenario in detail, not to catastrophize, but to problem solve. If it happened, what's the first step you'd take? Who would you lean on? What unexpected strength might emerge? That's how you turn dread into preparation, and preparation into power. The Spartans didn't conquer fear by ignoring it. They walked straight through it and came out the other side steeled for anything. A samurai kneels in the quiet before battle, polishing his sword with deliberate strokes. He knows the coming fight could turn on a stray arrow, a sudden storm, a comrade's misstep, countless variables beyond his command, yet his hands don't shake. Why? Because his training taught him to separate the blade's edge from the chaos of war. This is the essence of the Stoic dichotomy of control, a concept Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, crystallized in one piercing line. Some things are within our power while others are not. The samurai's focus wasn't on winning or even surviving. It was on swinging his sword with perfect form, right here, right now. Everything else noise. Fast forward to today, we drown in worries our ancestors would find baffling. Social media algorithms hijacking our attention, hypothetical disasters flashing across news feeds, the paralyzing fear of making the wrong life choice. But here's the irony: ancient warriors faced literal life and death stakes, yet their mental framework was cleaner than ours. Why? Because they drew a non-negotiable line between what deserved their energy and what didn't. Epictetus students kept journals listing 2 columns: what's up to me, a judgment, effort, desire, and what's not up to me, reputation, weather, others' actions. The practice wasn't about giving up, it was about focusing fiercely where it mattered. Imagine applying that razor to modern anxieties, that delayed flight. Uncontrollable, your reaction to it, a training ground for patience, a colleague's gossip, irrelevant, your integrity in response, everything. The Stoics didn't ignore external events, they just refused to let them dictate their inner world. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire but wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That's the samurai's clarity, directing all your skill toward the strike, then releasing attachment to the outcome. Here's a challenge straight from Epictetus' playbook. Tonight, grab paper and draw 2 columns. In the first, list 3 things you can control today: your effort on a project, how kindly you speak to a stranger, the time you dedicate to learning. In the second, jot down 3 things you can't: traffic, a friend's mood, the stock market. Then, do something radical, physically cross out the second column. Not as denial, but as liberation. That nagging worry about someone's opinion, the frustration over a rain-soaked picnic, gone. Like the samurai, you're conserving energy for where your blade actually cuts. So let me ask, what's one weight you've been carrying that belongs in the uncontrollable column? Drop it. Feel the lightness. That's not surrender. It's the first step toward real power. The brilliance of this practice lies in its simplicity. You don't need to meditate for hours or recite mantras. Just pause when tension creeps in and ask, is this mine to solve? If not, release it like an arrow already shot. If it is, act with the precision of a warrior who knows his target. Over time, that mental sorting becomes instinctive. Traffic jam, breathe. Critical email, respond with clarity. The noise fades, and what remains is your life lived not in reaction to chaos, but in alignment with purpose. That's the gift the Stoics offer. Not control over the world, but mastery over where you direct your attention. And in that shift, an extraordinary truth emerges: you were never meant to carry the weight of the uncontrollable. Your shoulders are meant for better things. A gladiator steps into the arena, the crowd roaring like a storm above him. Sand sticks to his wounds, his muscles scream from yesterday's training, but he doesn't flinch. To the spectators, pain is a spectacle. To him, a whetstone sharpening his will. This is the discipline of perception, not denying hardship but redefining it. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome from the battlefield, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." For the warrior, a broken bone wasn't a setback. It was proof they could endure more than their enemy. A defeat wasn't an ending. It was a lesson etched into their bones. This mental alchemy wasn't reserved for the Colosseum. Modern neuroscience calls it cognitive reframing, the ability to shift the meaning we assign to an event. Think of an athlete who misses the winning shot. One player sees it as proof they'll never be good enough. Another sees it as data pointing to where they need to improve. The event is identical. The story they tell themselves changes everything. The Stoics understood this centuries before brain scans. Suffering isn't in the wound, but in the resistance to the wound. When you stop fighting reality and start working with it, pain becomes purpose. Consider the Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, treating cracks as part of an object's history rather than flaws to hide. That's the warrior's mindset in action, every setback gilded with meaning. A failed business venture, now you know what pitfalls to avoid, a painful breakup. A masterclass in what you truly value in relationships. Even chronic illness can become a teacher, forcing a clarity about priorities that health might never reveal. The gladiator didn't ask for the spear's sting, but he decided what it would mean, and in that choice he found his power. So here's the challenge: pick a struggle you're facing right now. Maybe it's a project that's stalled, a conflict with a loved one, or a goal that feels impossibly far away. Now, imagine explaining it to a Stoic warrior. Would they see a dead end or a training ground? The Roman general Scipio Africanus didn't mourn when Hannibal's armies ravaged Italy. He studied their tactics, then sailed to attack Carthage itself. That's reframing at its boldest, not just weathering the storm, but using its winds to reach new shores. Your obstacles aren't roadblocks, they're the terrain. And the way you navigate them, that's the art of war applied to everyday life. The Spartan agoge, their legendary training system, wasn't just about building strength. It was about forging an unbreakable relationship with adversity. Boys as young as 7 were sent into the wilderness with nothing but a single cloak, forced to steal food to survive, and whipped if caught, not for the theft but for the failure of being caught. Brutal, absolutely, but every scrape of hunger, every night shivering under the stars was a deliberate lesson. Comfort is an illusion, and true resilience is born in discomfort. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, would later echo this with his famous metaphor: fire tests gold, adversity tests strong men. For the Spartans, every drop of sweat, every missed meal, every bruise was fire purging weakness from their souls. Fast forward to today, and we've built a world designed to eliminate hardship: central heating, instant meals, algorithms shielding us from opposing views. Yet something primal whispers that we've lost what the Spartans cultivated: the ability to not just endure adversity, but to invite it. Modern research backs this up. Studies on Navy SEALs show that those who voluntarily expose themselves to controlled stressors, cold water, sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, develop what psychologists call stress inoculation. Like a vaccine introducing a tiny threat to build immunity, these practices rewire the brain to handle chaos with calm. So how do you apply this ancient wisdom without joining the military? Start small. Turn your shower to cold for the final 30 seconds. Skip a meal and sit with the hunger, observing how it sharpens your focus. Take the stairs instead of the elevator, not for fitness, but for the mental reminder that discomfort is a teacher. The Stoics called this voluntary hardship, a way to prove to yourself that you're stronger than your cravings for ease. Seneca slept on the floor some nights, not because he had to, but because he wanted to remember he could. Here's the deeper truth the Spartans understood. Adversity doesn't just test you, it reveals you. When you willingly step into discomfort, you're not punishing yourself, you're rehearsing for life's inevitable storms. A missed promotion, a broken relationship, a health scare, these aren't anomalies, they're part of the human experience. By choosing smaller battles now, you arm yourself for the larger ones ahead. So ask yourself, what's one voluntary hardship you could introduce this week? Maybe it's waking up an hour earlier to write in a journal, or taking a social media fast, or having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the shift in mindset, from avoiding discomfort to seeing it as the whetstone that hones your edge. The warriors of old didn't wait for fate to test them, they sought out their own trials. In doing so, they transformed fear into familiarity, pain into power. Your modern agoge won't involve spears or shields, but the principle remains: strength isn't given. It's forged. The samurai sword gleamed not just from polish, but from principle. Bushido, their warrior code, held that true strength flowed from one source: virtue. Courage wasn't reckless aggression. It was the quiet resolve to stand by one's honor, even when the stakes were life itself. Wisdom wasn't mere knowledge, it was the clarity to see through fear's illusions. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher whose words shaped generations, put it plainly: virtue is the only good, not wealth, not fame, not even victory, just the integrity of one's character. For the samurai, this meant something visceral. A warrior who cheated in training might win a sparring match, but they'd lose something far more precious: their trust in themselves. Now contrast that with modern life's silent curriculum. We're taught to measure success in bank balances and job titles, to chase comfort at all costs. But here's the paradox: the more we prioritize material security over moral courage, the more fragile we become. A samurai who compromised his principles for safety would have been laughed out of the dojo. Yet today, we applaud the corner-cutting executive, the influencer selling hollow promises, the student who cheats just to keep up. The Stoics would ask, what good is a life preserved if it's stripped of what makes it worth living? Take the simple act of speaking truth when lies would be easier. Imagine a coworker takes credit for your idea in a meeting. The modern reflex might be to swallow the injustice to keep the peace. But the warrior's way, the virtuous way, isn't about picking fights. It's about refusing to let fear dictate your integrity. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." That response, rooted in virtue, becomes your armor. Every time you choose honesty over convenience, accountability over excuses, you're not just doing the right thing, you're training your mind to fear less. Because when you know your character is unshakable, external threats lose their sting. So where can you practice courage today? Not necessarily on a battlefield, but in the skirmishes of daily life. Maybe it's having that uncomfortable conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's turning down a lucrative offer that conflicts with your values. Or maybe it's as simple as admitting when you're wrong, even when pride begs you to double down. The samurai didn't wait for war to test their mettle. They saw every interaction as a dojo. Your virtue isn't forged in grand gestures, but in the 1,000 small choices where you could cut corners and don't. Wisdom, the other pillar of the warrior's mindset, isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. When fear whispers that you're not ready, that failure would be catastrophic, wisdom steps in to reframe the stakes. The samurai knew that death was inevitable, but dishonor was optional. Similarly, the Stoics taught that while we can't control outcomes, we can always control the quality of our efforts. That shift from fearing failure to focusing on excellence changes everything. A modern entrepreneur facing bankruptcy might panic, or they might channel Epictetus. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. Wisdom is recognizing that setbacks aren't verdicts on your worth, but feedback for your growth. The warrior's path isn't about eliminating fear, it's about rendering it irrelevant. When courage and wisdom become your compass, you move differently through the world. Less hesitation, more conviction. Less defensiveness, more curiosity. The samurai didn't wield virtue as a weapon, they wore it as a second skin, and in that alignment, where actions match principles, they found a fearlessness no enemy could breach. Your battles may look different, but the strategy remains. Let virtue be your anchor, and no storm can blow you off course. An archer draws his bowstring, the world narrowing to just 3 points, his breath, his fingers, and the distant target. In that suspended moment, there's no past failure haunting him, no future outcome clouding his focus, just the unwavering now. This was the warrior's secret weapon long before mindfulness became a buzzword, the ability to anchor oneself so completely in the present that fear couldn't find a foothold. Marcus Aurelius, who commanded legions amid the chaos of war, wrote, "Concentrate every minute like a Roman on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness." That's not poetic advice, it's battlefield survival. The ancient Greeks had a name for this state, eustathia, the discipline of stillness. Archery masters taught their students to sync each shot with the exhale, turning breath into a metronome for focus. Why? Because a mind racing ahead to "what if I miss?" or lagging behind on "why did I stumble?" is a mind divided, and division means death in combat. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Studies on elite athletes show that peak performance correlates with reduced activity in the brain's default mode network, the area responsible for self-referential thoughts about past and future. In other words, the best warriors weren't just physically trained. They'd hacked their mental state to operate like a Zen monk with a sword. Now, fast forward to your phone. Those mindfulness apps flooding the App Store, they're offering a diluted version of what gladiators and samurai drilled daily. Headspace's breathing exercises share DNA with the Roman legionnaire's pre-battle ritual of grounding himself by feeling the earth under his sandals. Calm's body scans echo the samurai's habit of mentally checking each muscle before drawing their katana. The packaging is new, but the core truth remains. Presence isn't passive, it's the ultimate active defense against chaos. Here's how to bridge ancient technique to modern life. Try this 5-minute drill straight from the archer's playbook. Sit upright, eyes soft. Inhale for 4 counts, imagining drawing an arrow back. Hold for 2, citing your target, not a literal one, but whatever task demands your full attention. Exhale for 6, releasing tension like a loosed arrow. Repeat. It's simple, but don't mistake simplicity for weakness. When Navy SEAL prepare for high-stakes missions, they use nearly identical box breathing to silence mental noise. The goal isn't to empty your mind, it's to fill it with what matters right now. Think back to the last time you felt utterly present. Was it mid-conversation with someone you love, hanging on their every word? Or maybe during a creative surge when hours felt like minutes? That's not coincidence. It's your brain operating as evolution designed, not multitasking, but unitasking with predator-like intensity. The warrior's edge wasn't supernatural. It was the disciplined return, again and again, to the immediacy of their body, their weapon, their environment. No apps, no gurus, just the raw practice of showing up. So here's the challenge. Next time stress threatens to hijack your focus, borrow the archer's lens. Ask not how to escape the pressure, but how to merge with it. The target isn't moving. The chaos isn't personal. Your job is simply to breathe, aim, and release one deliberate moment at a time. A Roman general stands before his troops on the eve of a battle where the odds are bleak. The enemy outnumbers them, the terrain is unfamiliar, and the weather could turn at any moment. Instead of promising victory, he says something startling. Fight not for the guarantee of triumph, but for the honor of having given everything. Let the gods decide the rest. That speech wasn't just morale boosting, it was tactical psychology. By redirecting his soldiers' focus from the uncontrollable outcome to the purity of their effort, he freed them to perform without the paralyzing weight of expectation. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, put it bluntly: the gladiator judges differently from the spectator. The first wishes to do his best, the second wants him to win. The warrior's power came from caring deeply about their discipline while remaining indifferent to the scoreboard. Fast forward to today, where performance anxiety cripples more potential than any battlefield. A student burns the midnight oil, yet their mind races ahead to the exam grade, twisting their stomach into knots. An entrepreneur pours passion into a startup, but obsessing over investor reactions saps their creativity. What's the common thread? Attachment to outcomes, the silent thief of excellence. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but a state where your effort is so aligned with your values that external validation becomes irrelevant. When a musician practices scales for the love of music rather than applause, they're channeling the same detachment that let ancient warriors charge into battle with clear minds. Here's the paradox: by releasing your grip on results, you often achieve better ones. Think of an archer in a tournament. If his hands shake from craving the gold medal, his aim suffers. But if he's absorbed in the rhythm of breath and release, skill takes over. Modern research echoes this. Studies on flow state show peak performance occurs when attention narrows to the activity itself, not its consequences. A surgeon isn't thinking about her reputation mid-operation. She's fully immersed in the stitch in front of her. That's detachment in action, not careless indifference, but hyper-focused engagement with the process. So how do you cultivate this mindset? Start by auditing your internal dialogue. When you catch yourself thinking, "What if I fail?" reframe it to, "What if I give this everything I've got?" The first question ties your worth to an uncontrollable result. The second roots it in actionable effort. Take inspiration from Seneca's letters, where he praised students who studied philosophy not to impress others, but to become better today than yesterday. That shift from proving to improving changes everything. Practical application. Try the Stoic Process Journal. Each night, write not about what you achieved, but about how fully you engaged. Did you work with integrity? Did you push your limits? Did you learn? Over time, this rewires your brain to derive satisfaction from the work itself, not just the trophy. The warrior's true victory wasn't in surviving the battle. It was in knowing they fought with unwavering commitment, regardless of the outcome. That's the freedom detachment offers, the ability to pour your soul into something while holding the results lightly. When you master that balance, you'll find a strange alchemy occurs. The less you need success, the more it tends to find you. Before dawn, Viking warriors would gather in a circle, their breath visible in the cold air as they began a low, rhythmic chant. This wasn't just superstition, it was neuroscience in action. The repetitive verses synchronized their heartbeats, steadying their minds like oars cutting through choppy waters. Half a world away, samurai performed the Chanoyu tea ceremony, their movements slow and deliberate, each gesture a meditation in focus. These rituals weren't distractions from battle, they were the bridge between chaos and control. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who trained minds to withstand adversity, observed, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit." For warriors, ritual was the whetstone that sharpened their mental edge long before steel met steel. Consider the Roman legionnaire strapping on his armor piece by piece, each buckle and strap a tactile reminder of his discipline. Or the Greek hoplite tracing his spear's shaft with oil, not just to preserve the wood, but to imprint the weapon's weight into his muscle memory. These acts transformed anxiety into automation. Modern psychology calls it anchoring, using physical or mental cues to trigger a desired state. When a warrior gripped his sword's hilt in the same way each time, it wasn't just about grip strength, it was a signal to his nervous system. This is where fear ends and focus begins. Now translate that to your morning. The alarm rings, and instead of reaching for your phone, you might reach for a journal, not to chronicle your day, but to excavate your mind. The Stoic practice of prosoch attention began with sunrise reflections, asking, "What's within my control today?" Others might choose 5 minutes of breathwork, syncing inhalation to a mantra like Marcus Aurelius. The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing. The power isn't in the specific act, but in the consistency. Like a Viking's chant, repetition trains the brain to transition from scattered to centered on command. Here's the challenge: identify one ritual that could serve as your mental armor. Maybe it's brewing tea mindfully, noticing the steam's curl as a reminder to slow down. Perhaps it's a single set of push-ups, not for fitness, but to prove to yourself that discomfort is survivable. The key is intentionality. A samurai didn't drink tea to quench thirst, he did it to cultivate presence. Your ritual isn't about the action itself, but the space it creates between stimulus and response. In that pause, you'll find the same clarity that guided warriors through storm and strife, the unshakable knowledge that some things, your breath, your focus, your resolve, are always yours to command. A Spartan commander surveys the battlefield at dawn, counting enemy campfires flickering in the distance. His lieutenants tense beside him, but his voice remains steady as he notes aloud, 5,000 spears against our 3. Their cavalry outflanks us here, the river blocks retreat there. The analysis isn't defeatist, it's strategic. By methodically dissecting the threat, he transforms the amorphous cloud of fear into discrete, manageable facts. This was the Stoic Art of Logismos, the disciplined use of reason to disarm terror. Marcus Aurelius, who spent decades leading Rome's legions, scribbled in his private journal, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That simple shift from fearing the thing to examining the fear itself was the warrior's intellectual armor. Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. When researchers at UCLA studied elite soldiers and emergency responders, they found a common mental habit: the ability to chunk overwhelming situations into specific, actionable components. A firefighter doesn't panic at the buildings collapsing. He assesses structural integrity, calculates exit routes, monitors oxygen levels. This mirrors the Stoic practice of Premeditatio Malorum, where fears are systematically deconstructed like an engineer analyzing a faulty bridge. The process works because anxiety thrives on vagueness. The moment you define a threat precisely, its likelihood, its components, your response options, it loses its fangs. Try this battlefield-tested exercise. Next time dread grips you, grab paper and make 3 columns. In the first, write the fear in blunt detail. Not, "I'm worried about finances," but "there's a 30% chance my contract won't renew next month, which could leave me short $8,000 for quarterly expenses." Already, the monster shrinks. The second column lists worst-case outcomes. "I'd need to dip into savings. I might take a temporary job outside my field." The third, your countermeasures. Update resume tonight. Reach out to 3 networking contacts by Friday. Like the Spartan commander, you're not denying the threat, you're mapping it, and in that mapping, reclaiming agency. The brilliance of this approach lies in its universality. A college student paralyzed by exam anxiety might list, "If I fail this test, 20% chance based on past performance, I can retake it next semester with a tutor's help." A parent fearing their child's risky career choice might realize their happiness matters more than prestige, and many successful people started in unconventional ways. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way," this was his meaning, not empty optimism, but the pragmatic recognition that every fear contains the seeds of its own solution if you're willing to examine it coldly. So here's the challenge: pick one shadow that's been dogging your thoughts. Maybe it's a health concern, a relationship rift, or professional stagnation. Now interrogate it like a Stoic general assessing enemy positions. What exactly are you afraid of? Not general failure, but the specific consequences. How likely is each scenario realistically? And most crucially, what's your next move if the worst manifests? You'll likely find what warriors have known for millennia. Most fears crumble under the weight of reason, and those that remain become problems to solve rather than monsters to flee. That shift from paralysis to preparation is where true courage begins. A Spartan warrior locks shields with his brothers, each man's survival hinging on the unbroken line beside him. The phalanx wasn't just a formation, it was a pact. To break rank was to betray not just yourself, but the men whose breath you felt on your neck. This was camaraderie forged in fire, the knowledge that fear might whisper to you alone, but courage was a chorus. Seneca, who knew the weight of standing firm in Nero's treacherous court, wrote, "Friendship always benefits, love sometimes injures." For warriors, loyalty wasn't about sentiment, it was the steel spine of collective resilience. When one faltered, the others leaned harder. Fast forward to today's isolated world where screens replace shoulder-to-shoulder bonds, yet the human need for kinship remains unchanged. Modern research on special forces units reveals something ancient warriors knew instinctively. Stress shared is stress halved. When Navy SEAL endure Hell Week, their ability to withstand pain skyrockets when they're tethered to a teammate's progress. It's not just willpower, it's biochemistry. Oxytocin, the so-called trust hormone, floods the brain during shared struggle, dialing down fear circuits. The Spartans didn't have fMRI machines, but they understood this truth in their bones. Alone, a soldier might crumble. Together, they became an avalanche. Consider the modern equivalent: mastermind groups. Entrepreneurs, artists, even parents form tight circles where victories are amplified and setbacks distributed. Like the phalanx, these groups work because they're built on reciprocal vulnerability. A Silicon Valley founder admitting burnout isn't weakness, it's strategy. Just as Seneca told his friend Lucilius, "Let us share our troubles as we share our joys," these networks formalize what warriors knew. Growth happens in the space between "I'm struggling" and "we've got you." The Roman legions had their contubernium, 8 men who cooked, slept, and fought as one. Today's version might be a weekly Zoom call where accountability replaces spears. But here's the catch: real camaraderie demands more than proximity. The Spartans didn't just throw random conscripts together. They drilled until each man could anticipate his brother's move. Depth mattered. Surface-level networking groups fail because they lack the shared purpose that turns acquaintances into allies. When a gladiator entered the arena, he didn't look to the crowd for strength. He locked eyes with his training partner in the stands. That's the difference between passive connection and active brotherhood. So who strengthens your resolve? Not the linked-in connections or followers, but the few who'd hold the line with you when the arrows fly. Maybe it's the coworker who challenges your excuses, the friend who calls at midnight to unpack your doubts, or the mentor who sees your potential even when you don't. Identify them, then, like the phalanx, close ranks. Send the text you've been putting off. I need to talk. True warriors, ancient or modern, know this secret. The mind's armor isn't just forged in solitude, but in the heat of trusted voices saying, again. Together, deep in the mountains of feudal Japan, a lone samurai kneels in a cave's damp stillness, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. No sword, no armor, just the rhythmic drip of water echoing like a slow heartbeat. This wasn't punishment, it was advanced training. For days, sometimes weeks, warriors would isolate themselves in darkness, not to escape the world, but to confront the chaos within. The goal, to hear the whispers of their own mind beneath the noise of battle, society, even their own breath. Epictetus, the Stoic sage who praised self-sufficiency, would have nodded in approval. If you seek tranquility, do less. Or rather, do what's essential, what the logos of a social being requires. For the samurai, silence wasn't empty, it was the blank canvas where clarity emerged. Modern science now confirms what these warriors intuited. MRI scans show that solitude, not loneliness, but deliberate alone time, triggers the brain's default mode network, the same circuitry that fuels creativity, problem-solving, and emotional processing. Think of it as mental defragmentation. The samurai's cave meditation finds its echo in Einstein's solitary sailboat rides, where he wrestled with relativity, or Steve Jobs' infamous walking meetings, where he insisted ideas needed physical space to breathe. Isolation wasn't about withdrawal, it was a strategic retreat to sharpen the blade of focus. But here's the challenge: our world has all but eradicated true solitude. Notifications fracture attention spans, playlists and podcasts flood every quiet commute. Even bathrooms aren't sacred anymore. How many of us scroll through news feeds while brushing our teeth? The Stoics would call this a crisis of avoidance. Seneca warned, all those who call you to themselves draw you away from yourself. The samurai didn't fear silence because they'd trained in its depths. We dread it because we've forgotten how to be alone with our thoughts, and that's where the real training begins. Try this experiment. Leave your phone at home and walk through a park or forest for 30 minutes. No podcasts, no music, just the crunch of leaves underfoot, the play of shadows through branches. At first, your mind might rebel, tossing up anxieties like, I should be working, or what if someone needs me? That's the mental equivalent of a muscle trembling under new weight. Push through. Notice how, after 10 minutes, your senses sharpen. Birdsong becomes distinct threads. The scent of pine resin tells a story. This isn't just relaxation, it's recalibration. The samurai returned from caves with heightened awareness, noticing an opponent's subtle shift in stance, detecting ambushes by the absence of crickets. Your modern battles demand the same acuity, reading a room's unspoken tensions, sensing opportunity in a client's hesitation. Epictetus, born into slavery, knew the power of inner sovereignty. He wrote, "You are the master of your mind, even in chains." Today's chains are digital, but the principle holds. Start small. Designate a silent hour each week, maybe early Sunday morning, where you brew tea without scrolling, sit by a window without agenda. The goal isn't to empty your mind, but to observe it without judgment. Like the samurai watching his breath in the cave, you'll begin to spot patterns. How stress manifests as a clenched jaw, how inspiration often arrives not in frantic effort, but in the pause between thoughts. What truth might silence reveal? For Marcus Aurelius, it was the fleeting nature of fame. For the samurai, the illusion of control. For you, perhaps that the project you've been avoiding isn't daunting. It's the distractions around it that are. Or that the relationship you've been nursing with texts thrives in uninterrupted presence. silence strips away the performative layers, leaving only what's real. The warrior's edge isn't forged in noise, but in the quiet moments where we meet ourselves anew and return to the world ready to listen, not just react. Roman legionnaires didn't just march to reach battlefields, they marched to conquer weakness. Strapping on 80 pounds of gear, they'd trek 30 miles a day across jagged terrain, their sandals wearing thin on rocky roads. Every blister, every muscle screaming for rest was a lesson. Discomfort isn't the enemy, surrender is. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher who trained gladiators and senators alike, put it bluntly: how can a man unbroken by labor become brave in battle? The answer was etched into their calloused feet and sunburnt necks. Physical endurance wasn't separate from mental toughness. It was the forge where fearlessness was hammered into being. Fast forward to today's gyms where the principle remains unchanged. When you push through that final rep, muscles trembling, it's not just your biceps growing stronger, it's your willpower. Neuroscientists call this transcendental resistance, where physical strain triggers the prefrontal cortex to override primal panic signals. Ancient warriors knew this instinctively. A Spartan's grueling Crypteia night drills weren't just about stamina, they were rehearsals for overriding the instinct to flee. Modern research confirms it. Navy SEAL who endure Hell Week emerge not just with stronger bodies, but with reshaped brains. Their neural pathways literally rewired to handle stress with eerie calm. Consider the ritual of cold showers, a practice as old as the Roman baths. Jumping into icy water isn't about hygiene, it's a masterclass in voluntary discomfort. Your body screams to escape, but when you stay breath steady, you're not just building cold tolerance, you're proving to your subconscious that you can face the unbearable and remain in control. The Stoics called this ascesis, deliberate practice in hardship. Today's athletes might call it embracing the suck, but the outcome is identical. A body hardened against fatigue trains a mind unshaken by fear. Now apply this to your own routine. Maybe it's holding a plank an extra 30 seconds when every fiber begs you to collapse, or taking the stairs instead of the elevator, not for fitness, but for the mental reminder that effort is optional until you make it mandatory. The key is intentionality. A legionnaire didn't march mindlessly. He focused on perfect posture, synchronized steps, breath control, transforming monotony into meditation. Your version could be focusing on flawless form during a workout, turning each squat into a study in precision. Here's the deeper truth these warriors uncovered. The body isn't just a tool for action, it's a puppet master of perception. When your lungs burn during a sprint, that's not just oxygen debt, it's your brain learning that distress signals can be ignored. When your hands stay steady during a freezing river crossing, you're not just proving physical resilience, you're teaching your amygdala that panic is a suggestion, not a command. Modern psychology backs this. Studies on embodied cognition show that adopting powerful postures, think, shoulders back, chin up, doesn't just change how others see you. It alters your biochemistry, reducing cortisol and boosting confidence. So let's flip the script on fitness. Instead of asking, how can I get stronger? Ask, what weakness is this workout helping me unlearn? The Legionnaire's march was never just about reaching the battlefield. It was about arriving as someone who'd already conquered exhaustion. Your morning run, your yoga hold, even your stubborn refusal to hit snooze, these aren't just habits. They're drills in the ancient art of mastering fear by first mastering the vessel that carries it. And in that mastery, you'll find a truth every warrior knew. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the body's hard-earned memory that you've survived harder before, and you'll survive again. A Roman general stands encircled by enemy forces, his armor dented, his sword chipped, yet his spine remains straight. He knows the battle is lost, but something profound unfolds in this moment, not defeat, but a quiet mastery over it. With deliberate calm, he removes his helmet, nods to his adversaries, and kneels. This isn't weakness, it's the ultimate act of sovereignty, choosing how to meet the inevitable. Marcus Aurelius, who faced his own mortality daily, wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." For the Stoics, surrender wasn't about giving up. It was about aligning with reality so completely that resistance became irrelevant. Consider the Japanese concept of yukami in martial arts, the art of receiving a fall. A novice tenses against the throw, guaranteeing injury. The master exhales and rolls with the impact, turning momentum into grace. Life's inevitabilities, aging, loss, change, are no different. We waste energy raging against wrinkles, clinging to faded relationships, or resenting career shifts that defy our plans. But what if we trained like warriors in the art of yielding? Seneca, who watched his own exile transform from punishment into creative fuel, observed, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Studies on radical acceptance show that patients who stop fighting chronic pain often experience less suffering, not because the pain vanishes, but because their relationship to it shifts. Think of an athlete retiring after decades in the spotlight. The ones who thrive aren't those denying time's passage, but those who pivot, coaching, commentating, or cultivating new passions. Their strength lies not in resisting the end of their prime, but in redefining what prime means. Here's the practice. Make a list of 3 things you've been wrestling with that are fundamentally unchangeable. Maybe it's a family member's stubborn worldview, a past mistake you can't undo, or the slow creep of gray hairs. For each, ask not "How can I fix this?" but "How might this shape me if I stopped fighting it?" A musician with arthritis switches from guitar to composing, discovering a gift for melodies she'd never explored. A divorced parent channels grief into deeper connections with their kids. Even aging, that universal inevitability, becomes less a thief and more a compass, pointing us toward wisdom, patience, and the kind of beauty that has nothing to do with mirrors. The Stoics didn't preach passive resignation. They championed clear-eyed engagement with life as it is, not as we wish it were. When Marcus Aurelius meditated on his own eventual death, he didn't dwell on fear. He reflected on the urgency it lent each sunrise. That's the warrior's surrender, not a white flag, but a silent pact to spend your finite days on what truly matters. So let me ask you this: what storm are you trying to outrun that might actually carry you to new shores if you stopped resisting and learned to sail it instead? The Norse warriors didn't just believe in fate, they toasted to it. Around roaring mead hall fires, they spoke of the Norns, the weavers who spun every mortal's thread from birth to doom. To modern ears, this sounds bleak, but Vikings saw something liberating. If the outcome was already woven, then glory lay not in changing destiny, but in meeting it with both hands. Their sagas brim with heroes who laugh in the face of certain death, not because they're reckless, but because they trust their role in the grand design. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who praised actors for playing their parts well, would have recognized this mindset instantly. Remember, he wrote, "You're an actor in a drama of someone else's choosing. If the playwright wants it short, make it short. If long, long." For warriors across cultures, humility wasn't about weakness. It was about aligning effort with forces larger than themselves. Fast forward to today's self-help shelves groaning with titles like "Control Your Destiny" and "Bend the Universe to Your Will." The contrast couldn't be sharper. Where ancient fighters saw a dance with fate, we're taught to demand a solo. A trader glued to stock tickers, raging against market dips, embodies this modern tension. The Stoics would ask, does clenching your fists at the weather make the storm pass faster? Real strength, they argued, lies in distinguishing between what's yours to steer and what's yours to navigate. The Norse didn't stop rowing because the waves were predetermined. They rowed better, knowing the sea would have its way regardless. This isn't passive resignation, it's strategic humility. Consider the archer who draws his bow in a gale. He can't command the wind, but he can learn its patterns, adjust his aim, and release the arrow with precision. The shot may still miss, but his worth isn't measured by the target's bullseye. It's in the integrity of his effort. Marcus Aurelius, who held the reins of an empire, reminded himself daily, the cucumber is bitter. Then throw it away. There are brambles in the path, then go around. That's all you need to know. No drama, no obsession with fairness, just clear-eyed adaptation. So where does this leave us in a world obsessed with control? Start by auditing your frustrations. That delayed flight, the sudden layoff, the friend who ghosts you. How much energy do you burn raging against what's already unfolded? The warrior's way isn't to ignore these pains, but to greet them as the Norn's threads, unchangeable in themselves, yet rich with potential for how you respond. A farmer doesn't curse the drought, he deepens his well. A boxer doesn't protest the punch, he rolls with it and counters. Here's the invitation. Pick one area where you've been clashing with life's current. Maybe it's a career path that's stalled despite your hustle, or a relationship that refuses to fit your expectations. Now, ask the Vikings question. If this is the thread I've been given, how can I weave it into something worthy? Not control, but craftsmanship. Not resistance, but reverence for the raw material of reality. After all, the mightiest oaks grow not by dictating the storm, but by bending with it, and in that bend, discovering their true strength. The samurai sword was sharpened not just by stone, but by principle. Bushido, their warrior code, carved honor into every action, not as abstract virtue, but as daily discipline. A samurai would rather slit his belly than break a promise, not because death frightened him less, but because dishonor wounded him more. This wasn't blind tradition, it was existential mathematics. As the philosopher Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, life is long if you know how to use it. For Stoics and samurai alike, principles weren't shackles, they were compasses that turned chaos into direction. Fast forward to today's dizzying world of endless choices. A CEO stares at her inbox, 200 unread emails, each demanding a decision. A college student scrolls through streaming options, paralyzed by the paradox of plenty. Modern life bombards us with micro-choices that drain willpower like a battery in the cold. What's missing? The clarity of a warrior's code. Bushido offered 7 virtues: rectitude, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, loyalty, not as lofty ideals but as filters. Confronted with any dilemma, the samurai didn't ask what's easiest, but what aligns with my principles. That single question sliced through indecision like a katana through silk. Consider the modern equivalent: personal mission statements. Steve Jobs famously asked himself daily, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do? Billionaire investor Ray Dalio built Bridgewater Associates on radical transparency, encoding his principles into an algorithm-like handbook. These aren't corporate buzzwords, they're survival tactics for an age of cognitive overload. When Seneca advised, set a standard for your life that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances, he wasn't preaching perfection, he was offering a lifeline. A warrior's code doesn't eliminate hard choices, it reveals which choices are worth the struggle. Here's the experiment: grab paper and distill your code to 3 non-negotiables. Maybe it's speak truth even when costly, protect time for creativity, or never let hurry erode kindness. Then, the next time indecision strikes, whether it's taking a shady shortcut at work or skipping your workout, hold the choice against your principles like a blacksmith testing steel. Does it ring true or crack under pressure? The samurai knew a blade forged without integrity would fail when needed most. Your decisions are no different. What makes this practice revolutionary isn't rigidity, but liberation. Psychologists call it decision pre-commitment. By defining boundaries in advance, you conserve mental energy for what matters. A doctor who vows first, do no harm, doesn't debate ethics mid-surgery. A parent committed to be fully present at dinner silences their phone without willpower. Like the samurai's katana, your code becomes an extension of your will, not controlling you, but clearing the path so you can move unhesitatingly. So let me ask, when the fog of modern life rolls in, when every option seems equally murky, what stars will you navigate by? Not the shifting opinions of others, not the fleeting allure of convenience, but the principles you've tempered in the fires of reflection. That's the warrior's true weapon, not the sword in his hand, but the compass in his soul. A gladiator stumbles in the arena, sand sticking to his bleeding wounds, the crowd's roar pounding in his ears like a drum. Yet he doesn't collapse, he grits his teeth and rises. Why? Because every scar, every drop of sweat has taught him a brutal but vital truth: pain isn't the enemy. It's the forge where real strength is hammered into being. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome through war and plague, wrote, "The obstacle in the path becomes the path." Within every obstacle is an opportunity to improve our condition. For the gladiator, the whip's lash wasn't just suffering, it was the fire that tempered his will. The same philosophy that kept ancient warriors standing can transform modern burnout into fuel. Consider the white-collar warrior of today, exhausted by back-to-back Zoom calls, drowning in emails, feeling creativity wither under the weight of deadlines. The instinct is to see this stress as a sign to retreat. But what if, like the gladiator, you recognized it as raw material? A software developer grinding through a bug-filled project might frame it as torture or as a masterclass in problem-solving under pressure. A nurse working double shifts could crumble under fatigue, or she could view each sleepless night as training in resilience no seminar could replicate. The pain is identical. The story you tell about it changes everything. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where hardship, when processed with intention, doesn't just leave scars but upgrades your mental operating system. Studies on elite athletes show that those who reframe injuries as forced recovery periods often return stronger, not just physically but strategically. A torn ACL becomes time to study game footage. A sidelined season turns into a chance to mentor rookies. The Stoics practiced this alchemy daily. Seneca, exiled to a barren island, didn't lament his fate. He wrote some of his greatest letters there, observing, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." Here's the key: transformation requires more than passive endurance. The gladiator didn't just survive his wounds, he studied them. He noticed which movements aggravated the injury and adapted his stance. Similarly, burnout recovery isn't about pushing through. It's about mining the burnout for data. Which tasks drain you versus those that energize? What boundaries were crossed? What values were neglected? A marketing executive might realize her exhaustion stems not from workload, but from a misalignment with her core desire to create rather than manage. That's the pivot point where pain stops being something to escape and starts being the compass pointing toward necessary change. So let's make this personal. Grab a notebook and finish this sentence. My current struggle with fill in the challenge is teaching me, maybe it's, my insomnia is revealing how much I need to delegate. or this creative block is forcing me to explore new inspiration sources. The gladiator's power came from seeing every wound as a lesson in anatomy. Your struggles, no matter how small, hold the same potential if you're willing to interrogate them rather than just endure them. The final step, act on the lesson. Ancient warriors didn't just philosophize about pain, they used it to refine their tactics. A Roman legionnaire who twisted his ankle on march learned to wrap it tighter next time. Apply that same pragmatism. If work stress exposes your need for more autonomy, draft a proposal for flexible hours. If loneliness during a career pivot highlights your hunger for community, join a mastermind group. Pain whispers where you need to grow, but only action turns that whisper into strength. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his journal confesses nightly struggles with temper, patience, and fear. What made him extraordinary wasn't the absence of suffering, it was his relentless curiosity about what the suffering could reveal. Your burnout, your frustration, your fatigue, they're not roadblocks. They're the forge and the metal being tested. That's the unbreakable version of you still taking shape. The ancient Egyptians built entire civilizations around death, pyramids as stairways to the afterlife, mummification as a bridge to eternity. Their art teemed with scarab beetles symbolizing rebirth. Their texts meticulously detailed the journey through the underworld. Fast forward to today, where we hide mortality behind euphemisms, passed away, no longer with us, as if softening the language could delay the inevitable. We swipe past funeral notices on social media, relegating cemeteries to the outskirts of cities like inconvenient secrets. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who trained minds to stare down fate, would have scoffed at our evasion. Why do you weep for the dead when death itself waits at the end of every road? Consider the Vanitas paintings of the Dutch Golden Age, elaborate still lifes with rotting fruit, wilting flowers, and skulls gleaming amid goblets of wine. These weren't morbid obsessions, they were urgent reminders in an age of plagues and wars. All this beauty, all your striving, exists against the backdrop of the hourglass. A merchant admiring such a painting might pause before swindling a neighbor. A king might reconsider his thirst for conquest. Modern equivalents are scarce. Our screens flood with curated immortality-filtered faces, highlight reels, ads promising eternal youth through creams and cardio. The skull has been replaced by the selfie. But here's the cost of this denial. When we treat death as a distant rumor rather than a life coach, we risk living as tourists rather than pilgrims. A CEO hoards wealth, blind to the fact that no vault spans generations. A couple postpones their dream trip, waiting for a perfect time that may never come. Even our language betrays us. We fight illness like it's an invader, not a natural thread in life's tapestry. The Stoics proposed a radical alternative. Let death be your advisor. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in a palace but on battlefields, with the stench of fallen soldiers in the air. His clarity came from daily dialogue with the finite. So how might we reintroduce this wisdom? Start small. A museum visit to study those Vanitas paintings, not as relics but as mirrors. A journal prompt. If this were my last year, what would I stop tolerating? Even a screensaver of a withering flower, not to depress but to focus. The Japanese practice of kotsuage, where family members hand-pick their loved one's bones from cremation ashes, isn't grotesque. It's a tactile lesson in impermanence. The warrior's advantage wasn't ignoring death. It was letting that awareness sharpen their choices like a whetstone on steel. Ask yourself, what would you dare if you stopped pretending you had forever? The projects you'd launch, the grudges you'd release, the love you'd speak aloud. Death isn't the thief of meaning, it's the giver. Without an endpoint, there's no urgency, no need to choose well. The gladiator entering the arena didn't waste breath on small talk. Every word carried weight. That's the gift of Memento Mori, not a morbid obsession, but a spotlight on what's luminous precisely because it won't last. The cherry blossom's power lies in its fleeting bloom. Your life's power lies in the same truth. Legacy crackled in the air of Viking mead halls, where skalds wove sagas not of kings who ruled the longest, but of warriors who burned brightest. A single raid could etch a name into eternity, not for its plunder, but for its daring. Berserkers who charged against impossible odds, shield maidens who defended retreating kin, explorers who sailed into unmapped horizons. These were the stories that outlived flesh and bone. The Norse didn't measure lives in years, but in echoes. As Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "It's not that we have too little time, but that we waste much of it." The Stoics' razor cut deep. Longevity without purpose is just delayed decay. Fast forward to today's obsession with life hacks and longevity labs, where billionaires chase immortality through cryonics and gene therapies. But the warrior's question lingers. What's the point of adding decades to your life if you don't add life to your decades? A Silicon Valley founder might amass wealth, yet leave no ripple beyond stock prices. Contrast that with a teacher who spends her evenings mentoring at risk. Teens, her legacy isn't in bank statements, but in the lives she redirects from despair to dignity. The Stoics would nod in recognition. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the known world, measured his days not by imperial decrees, but by small acts of integrity. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. This isn't about grandeur. A Viking saga might celebrate a single act of courage, a sailor diving into frozen waters to save a comrade. Modern equivalents abound. The nurse who champions patient advocacy, the mechanic who trains apprentices in craftsmanship and ethics, the neighbor who organizes community gardens in food deserts. Legacy isn't built in dramatic finales, but in daily choices that outlast you. When Seneca advised, "Leave something for posterity," he wasn't demanding pyramids. He was urging us to plant trees whose shade we'll never sit under. Practical application. Start with what psychologists call generativity, the desire to nurture the next generation. A software engineer might open source code tutorials, ensuring knowledge spreads beyond his tenure. A retired baker could document family recipes, turning flour and sugar into cultural heirlooms. Even social media, often a vortex of vanity, can become a loom for legacy. A chef filming lost culinary techniques, a grandparent podcasting immigrant stories. The medium doesn't matter, the intention does. So ask yourself the warrior's question. When the skalds sing of you, what verse will they chant? Not the size of your house, but the depth of your compassion. Not the titles you held, but the bridges you built. A Viking sword rusts in a museum case, but the courage it represents still stirs hearts a millennium later. Your legacy isn't a monument, it's the momentum you create in others. And that kind of immortality, it's already within your grasp. The Stoics didn't just accept mortality, they weaponized it. Picture Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, scribbling in his journal by candlelight. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not a morbid threat, but a clarion call. That flickering flame wasn't just light, it was a timer. For ancient warriors, death wasn't a distant abstraction. It was the whetstone that sharpened their days into blades of purpose. They understood what modern psychology now confirms. Nothing focuses the mind like the awareness that time is a non-renewable resource. Consider the modern bucket list, that catalog of dreams we stash away for someday. Skydiving, learning Italian, reconciling with an estranged sibling. The irony, these lists often grow longer while the window to act grows narrower. We treat time like an endless scroll, swiping past opportunities with the casual assurance that there's always more to come. The Stoics would call this delusion. Seneca mocked the man who arranges his life as if he were destined to live forever, yet hesitates to mend a fractured friendship or write the book burning in his chest. The warrior's edge came from inverting this, seeing each sunrise not as guaranteed but as stolen. A Roman general planning a campaign didn't draft endless contingency plans. He identified the decisive stroke and struck. Why? Because hesitation could mean watching his legion starve come winter. Modern parallels abound: the entrepreneur delaying her startup launch for a perfect moment that never arrives. The artist waiting for inspiration rather than showing up daily at the easel. Procrastination isn't laziness, it's a failure to viscerally grasp that the sand in the hourglass is already falling. The Japanese concept of ikai go ikai, one time, one meeting, captures this. Samurai treasured cherry blossom viewings precisely because the blooms lasted mere days. Their fleeting beauty was the point. So here's the visceral question: what dream have you been shelving until conditions align? That cross-country road trip waiting for retirement, the hard conversation postponed to avoid discomfort. The creative project buried under when I have more time. The warrior's mindset demands brutal honesty. Conditions will never be perfect. The market will always fluctuate. Your knees will eventually creak. The inbox will never empty, but this very moment, this breath, this heartbeat is irrevocably yours to spend. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet his meditations obsess over the fragility of a single day. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life, now take what's left and live it properly, not as a dirge but as liberation. When you stop pretending you're immortal, every later transforms into now. The Viking sailing into uncharted waters, the gladiator stepping onto the sand, the nurse holding a stranger's hand in their final moments, they all shared this superpower, the ability to let death's shadow illuminate life's urgency. Your dreams aren't items for a list, they're embers, and embers left untended become ashes. Navy SEAL don't just train their bodies, they forge their minds like ancient blacksmiths tempering steel. Their infamous Hell Week, where candidates go 5 days with barely 4 hours of sleep total, isn't just about physical endurance. It's a modern-day agoge, the Spartan rite of passage that stripped boys down to their rawest selves to rebuild them as warriors. And at the heart of this transformation, Stoic philosophy. When SEAL instructors quote Epictetus, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters. They're not offering motivational fluff. They're handing recruits a mental shield, one that's been battle-tested for over 2,000 years. Consider the 40% rule drilled into every SEAL candidate. When your mind screams you're done, you've actually only tapped 40% of your capacity. This isn't pseudoscience, it's Stoicism in camouflage. The ancient gladiator rising after a fall, the samurai steadying his breath mid-duel, the SEAL dragging himself through icy surf, all are tapping the same truth. Limits are stories we tell ourselves. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by his master, knew this intimately. His discourses don't dwell on his suffering, they dissect how perception shapes reality. Men are disturbed not by things but by the views they take of them. Swap things for Hell Week and you've got the SEAL playbook, but here's where ancient wisdom meets modern application. SEAL teams don't just endure hardship, they ritualize it. Pre-dawn cold plunges mirror the Roman practice of voluntary discomfort. The nightly ego check, where teammates critique each other's performance, echoes Seneca's evening reflections. What bad habit did I curb today? How am I better? Even their infamous sugar cookie drill being ordered to roll in sand until fully coated, then stand at attention for hours isn't hazing. It's negative visualization in action. You think this is humiliating. Wait until real combat. By willingly embracing the absurd, they immunize themselves against chaos. You don't need BUD/S training to harness these techniques. Start with the Stoics' simplest tool, the evening audit. As dusk falls, ask 3 questions. What did I control today? Where did I let externals dictate my peace? What's one action tomorrow that aligns with my principles? Marcus Aurelius did this on campaign, scribbling in his journal by torchlight. A CEO might do it with a voice memo. A parent might reflect while washing dishes. The format doesn't matter, the honesty does. This nightly reckoning isn't about self-judgment, it's about incremental mastery. Like a warrior inspecting his blade for nicks, you're maintaining your mental edge. Now, the invitation, which ancient practice will you adapt? Maybe it's the Spartan habit of eating a plain meal once a week to savor sufficiency. Or the samurai's mushin, clearing the mind before big decisions by focusing on breath. Even something as simple as leaving your phone in another room for an hour trains the attention muscles Roman centurions honed on watch. The goal isn't to mimic the past, but to raid its toolkit. After all, the phalanx and the SEAL team may be separated by millennia, but their greatest weapon remains the same, a mind taught to stare down the storm and smile. Stoicism often gets mislabeled as cold detachment, a philosophy that turns people into unfeeling statues, indifferent to joy and numb to sorrow. Modern critics argue that suppressing emotions is psychologically harmful, and they're not entirely wrong. Bottling up grief or ignoring fear can backfire, leading to burnout, resentment, or even physical illness. Even Seneca, the Stoic sage who wrote extensively on resilience, warned against extremes. No man was ever wise by chance, he cautioned, emphasizing that wisdom lies not in erasing emotions, but in mastering their currents. A warrior who feels no fear is reckless, not brave. The key isn't to eliminate emotions, but to prevent them from hijacking reason. Take fear, for example. Stoicism doesn't teach you to ignore the adrenaline surge before a high-stakes presentation or the gut punch of a looming deadline. Instead, it trains you to interrogate that fear. Is this a signal worth heeding or noise clouding my judgment? Healthy fear keeps a firefighter from rushing into a collapsing building without backup. It's what prompts a pilot to double-check turbulence reports. The Stoic distinction lies in why you act not because panic demands it, but because prudence recommends it. Marcus Aurelius, despite his meditations on accepting fate, meticulously planned military campaigns. His journals reveal a man who weighed risks carefully, not a fatalist leaving everything to chance. The line between recklessness and resilience often comes down to discernment. Consider a rock climber assessing a treacherous route. The Stoic approach isn't to ignore the dizzying drop, but to acknowledge it while focusing on each deliberate handhold. Fear becomes data, not a dictator. Ancient archers didn't deny their racing hearts. They used that heightened awareness to steady their aim. Modern neuroscience supports this. Moderate stress sharpens focus, while chronic, unmanaged stress impairs it. The warrior's edge comes from leveraging fear's energy without letting it dictate the mission. So where does Stoicism meet caution? In the pause between stimulus and response. A doctor delivering bad news isn't heartless for maintaining composure. They're channeling empathy into clarity. A parent calmly guiding a child through a meltdown isn't suppressing concern. They're modeling how to navigate storms. Even the Stoic practice of Premeditatio Malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios, isn't about dwelling on doom, but about preempting panic. By mentally rehearsing challenges, you're not inviting disaster, you're building a cognitive playbook for when pressure hits. Balance, then, is Stoicism's silent cornerstone. It's the difference between a soldier who charges blindly and one who advances with measured steps, aware of risks but undeterred by them. Seneca put it best: courage without judgment is a wild beast. The goal isn't to eradicate fear or sorrow, but to partner with them, letting them inform you without imprisoning you. After all, even the sturdiest shield is useless if it's so heavy you can't lift it. The warrior's path wasn't about conquering death, it was about letting death conquer fear. Through Memento Mori, they stared into the abyss until the abyss lost its power. With amor fati, they embraced fate so fully that even loss became a kind of victory. And by mastering the dichotomy of control, they learned to pour their energy only into what their hands could shape, letting go of the rest like sand through a sieve. These weren't just mental tricks, they were lifelines. A Roman gladiator stepping into the arena, a samurai sheathing his sword for the last time, a Viking sailing toward an uncharted horizon, all carried the same quiet certainty that a life lived without terror of the end is a life lived fully. Epictetus, the philosopher who turned his own suffering into wisdom, left us a compass for this courage. It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters. That simple shift from passive victim to active participant in your own destiny changes everything. The warriors of old didn't waste breath cursing storms, they adjusted their sails. They didn't beg for lighter loads, they strengthened their backs, and in that shift they found a freedom no enemy could steal. Now the challenge passes to you. This week, carve out 10 minutes for a Stoic death meditation. Sit quietly and ask, if this were my final month, what would I stop postponing? Who would I thank? What petty grievances would I release? Don't dwell in morbidity. Use it as a lens to clarify what's luminous. Notice how your shoulders drop when you stop fighting inevitabilities. Feel the weight lift when you focus only on your next right step. That's the warrior's secret, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger: purpose. Share in the comments which principle resonated most. Was it the stark clarity of Memento Mori, the fierce embrace of amor fati, or the liberating focus of the controlled dichotomy? Your insights might light the path for others, because the truth is, we're all in the arena now, not with swords, but with choices. And the same philosophy that steeled ancient hearts against spears can fortify yours against the chaos of modern life. The training begins today. The enemy, not death, but the illusion that you have forever to start